Thanks so much. Whoa. Great to be back in the Netherlands, and great to be back around so many people who share my passion for good government, great neighborhoods, healthy communities, vibrant democracy, and lots of parties. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to tonight. Yeah. So I want to start off by just saying I think there's really two paths to creating a healthy community. And the first path is agency services, and the other path is Burger Crocked. Yeah! They're two very different paths. Two very different paths. With service delivery, we have different classes of people. We got the professionals, we got the clients, we got the volunteers. With Burger Crocked, we're all citizens. With agency services tend to be top-down, whereas with Burger Crocked, it's democratic. Agency services focus on needs. Burger Crocked is all about people's gifts. Agency services tend to be one way, whereas Burger Crocked's all about reciprocity, mutual support. Agency services tend to be siloed, whereas Burger Crocked, everything is holistic. It's where everything comes together. And agency services are totally dependent on money. Burger Crocked is totally dependent on people's relationships and trust. And as I said, both paths are absolutely essential. The problem is over time, we've had more and more and more and more services and less and less and less community. Robert Putnam, professor at Harvard University, wrote a book called Bowling Alone. The most depressing book for those of us who care deeply about our communities, because he tracks the incredible breakdown of community life across North America over the past 50 years. And as I travel around the Netherlands, I see the same forces at work here. With single-purpose land use, we aren't bumping into the same people over and over again. We're losing our sense of community. People being increasingly mobile, not building the relationships that we used to have when we lived in the same village generation after generation. More time working, fear, electronic screens of all types, increasing globalization where decisions and products are made further and further away from where we live. And I think perhaps most troubling that the very agencies that are trying to help our communities are inadvertently contributing to the breakdown of our communities. Where we have more and more and more professionals doing for community what communities used to do better for themselves. And where the strength of every agency is that they're siloed with a laser-like focus on their function, on their mission. But it makes it absolutely impossible to work with communities. We've created one set of silos for old people, another one for young people, another one for people with disabilities, another for new immigrants and refugees. Everybody's in their own box, and you can't build community in boxes. Now our communities are having to organize themselves the way our professionals are organized. Who's serving whom? I just was recently in Taiwan and was reminded that the Chinese word for crisis is made up of two characters, one meaning danger and the other meaning opportunity. So the good news right now is we got lots of opportunity. Lots of opportunity. The bad news, of course, is we're facing multiple crises. And the first crisis, or second crisis, really is a crisis of our democracy. We heard the former mayor talk about how our democracy is being hijacked by political parties. But at least in my country, it's also being hijacked by the corporations, by the politicians, and by the civil servants. We have fewer and fewer people voting. We've got more and more people thinking of themselves as ratepayers rather than as citizens. And I think that crisis is getting us to rethink about the importance of democracy. And we're starting to recognize that it's not enough to focus on customer service. Because if government is just treating people as customers, the inverse relationship is they think of themselves only as ratepayers. And we've lost our democracy. So we're starting to recognize the value of citizen participation. That it's not just the professional citizens, but all citizens who have great value to bring to our democracy, that we get the best possible decisions when we combine the expertise of the civil servants with the expertise of the people. But I think we're starting to realize that that's not enough. That with citizen participation, all the power is still with government. It's involving the people in the government's processes and programs and the government's priorities. We need to move beyond that to community empowerment, supporting the communities around their own priorities through their own associations. Third major crisis we're facing is the economic crisis. Very time people's needs are the greatest, our agencies have had the fewest resources to respond. And we're starting to recognize that all the resources aren't just with the agencies, that there are incredible untapped resources in our communities. But for too long, we've just focused on the half-empty part. We've just looked at our communities, at our neighborhoods as places with great needs. And we've forgotten about the incredible untapped resources that are in absolutely every neighborhood and every community. And the fourth major crisis we're facing is the crisis of climate change. And I think we're starting to realize we're not going to make it if it's just about government regulations. We actually need to change the way we live. That there is a role for community. That if we're just thinking of ourselves as individuals, what difference does it make if I don't act responsibly? I'm one person on this huge planet. But it's in community that we realize that our actions are going to have consequences. We realize that collectively we can make a difference. I want to share a story about the power of community from one of our neighborhoods in Seattle. This is a woman named Sarah. She had, what's that area called? That planting strip between the street and the sidewalk? What do you guys call it? Boulevard? Yeah, it's owned by local government, but the homeowner has to keep it up. And it's really not good for anything because it's such a narrow piece of grass. Well, Sarah was tired of this, and without asking anybody's permission, she just went out and tore up her grass. And she put in native plants that would attract bees and butterflies and hummingbirds, pollinator plants. Her neighbors got so excited that they started tearing up their front strips. And it started connecting all the neighbors. It started connecting all of the front yards. It started bringing back the pollinators. And now they've got a 1-mile-long pollinator pathway that connects all the front yards from Seattle University, where they don't allow any fertilizers or pesticides, all the way to a native forest. And now the adjacent streets are creating their own pollinator pathways, and it's really working. But we're starting to learn, as Margaret Wheatley said, no matter what the question, community is the answer. When it comes to the things we care most deeply about, caring for one another, preventing crime. In my country, we spent more and more and more money on so-called justice and public safety programs. We have more and more and more people behind bars, and people aren't feeling any more safe. We've forgotten about the role of community in crime prevention. Responding to disaster, both Colby and Christchurch are sister cities of Seattle. I was in both places soon after the earthquakes. And they said the number one lesson they learned was there's absolutely no substitute for people knowing their neighbors, because that's all you can count on right after an emergency. Promoting health. Healthcare professionals are only responsible and only affect a small percentage of our health outcomes. In many ways, our communities have a much bigger impact on our personal behaviors, on our mental health, on the social and economic and physical and environmental conditions that impact our health. Sustaining the local economy, advancing social justice. In my country, no major social changes ever come top down. It's all come bottom up. Civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the disability rights movement, the gay lesbian rights movement, the environmental movement, the anti-war movement. Every major change has come bottom up. So without strong communities, we can't make change. And creating sparkling streets and eyes. Absolutely. Community is the only solution to that. There's also a role for government. Only government should be making and enforcing laws. Only government can ensure people's basic needs are met, safeguard people's rights, plan and manage transportation systems. And there's some things best done by government and community in collaboration through co-creation. When it comes to public safety, probably the strongest role regarding emergency response is with government. Government probably also plays the biggest role with risk intervention. But when it comes to crime prevention, when it comes to social development, that's the community's role. In many ways, the community can have much bigger impact on public safety than government can. So how do we rebuild that partnership? I'm not one of those Tea Party people who thinks the solution to having less community is to have less government. I think we need strong government, and we need strong community. So my passion is, how do we get the best of both? How do we create really, really powerful partnerships between government and community? And I think there's three major paradigm shifts that government needs to make if they're going to be good partners with our community. And the first one is we need to get out of the silos. City of Seattle and our local government, we have 32 departments, each organized around their own function. We have our county government with all its departments, our state government with all its departments, our federal government with all its departments. We've got a school district. We've got a port authority. We've got 3 transit agencies. And we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nonprofit organizations, each trying to reach out on their own and engage the community. They are being engaged to death. There aren't enough nights in the year to go to all those meetings. So if we're really going to work effectively with our communities, we need to work in more of a place-based way. Look at how our functions come together in one place. Work as one set of agencies in a place rather than as many separate entities. So in the city of Seattle, we tried to address that by creating a Department of Neighborhoods. First time we'd organized a department the way the community was organized, by neighborhood. Our mayor had a concern about that. He said, we're going to create yet another silo department with another department focused on neighborhoods. And everybody else can just do business as usual. It's not going to work. So took that as an important signal when I was appointed director of the department, try to figure out how do we help all departments become a Department of Neighborhoods? How do we get city government to work in more of a place-based kind of way? And we set up little city halls, 13 of them in neighborhood business districts, to help people connect with government at all levels, across all departments, and with the nonprofit organizations. And each little city hall has a coordinator, somebody who helps connect government and the community. They often refer to themselves as overt double agents. Really clear they're working for both government and the community. And their job is just to help the two work better together across all the different silos, with more of the focus on the place, starting with the community rather than with the function. I think it's very similar to the job that many of you do. Second major paradigm shift is, instead of always focusing on this map of our neighborhoods, we're focusing on all the problems, to start focusing on this map, the strengths of the community. Both maps are totally legitimate. It's good we focus on this map. There are needs in the community that can't be addressed sufficiently by the community. There is a role for government. But too oftentimes, this has become our sole map of the people and places with which we work, and we've forgotten about this map of the same place, which are all the strengths of the community. And I would submit that this is the basis for partnerships. If we're just focusing on what the community is missing, there's really no power in the community. They're always looking outside the community for all the answers. There's really no value in partnering with the community because they aren't bringing anything to the table. It's when we start focusing on the strengths of the community that the community is really empowered and can come to the table as a real partner and isn't totally dependent on professionals. One of the ways we tried to address that in Seattle is we created a neighborhood matching fund, a fund that would support community self-help projects where people could come together to focus on projects that have been a priority for the neighborhood but had not been a priority for City Hall. And we said we would provide a cash match to the community in exchange for the community's equal match of volunteer labor valued at $10 an hour. That any group of neighbors could come together. You didn't have to go through those usual suspects, those neighborhood associations that often become the gatekeepers and keep everybody else away. And we said we'll have all the funny decisions made by the neighborhood leaders themselves. Last year, we celebrated the 20th anniversary of that program in Seattle. Over that time, there have been more than 5,000 community self-help projects completed. Evidence of them in absolutely every neighborhood, greatly reinforcing what's special about that place, contributing to the quality of life in that neighborhood. Over that last 20 years, the city's $60 million investment has leveraged $85 million in community resources that under the old model, where people were looking to government to do everything, never would have been tapped. But the best benefit is it's newly involved tens of thousands of people in community life because we've finally given people a way to get involved other than going to meetings. And believe it or not everybody in Seattle likes to go to meetings. I'm sure it's different here. But usually that's the only option we give people. We're often trying to engage community before we have built community. We're talking about participatory democracy, getting people involved in city processes before people have even connected with each other. So we need to recognize the role of government in helping to build community. And I find projects is one of the best ways to get people connected, to have them be productive as well, and to do things communities do best. So here's some examples of what's come out of our Neighborhood Matching Fund. Every one of our playgrounds, both in our parks and our schools, has been redeveloped by the community. Redesigned. It used to be every one of our playgrounds looked exactly the same. I think our Parks Department got a really good deal. Now each playground reflects what's special about that place. This particular playground was developed in Carkeek Park, where the neighbors worked for 20 years to clean up the Piper's Creek to make a better salmon habitat. They finally got the salmon back. They said, now we want to get kids into our park. We need a playground. They had the design meeting. One of the kids showed up and said, I want a salmon playground. All the adults were scratching their heads because they'd never seen a salmon playground before. But a local artist said, I've got an idea, and he built a 19-foot-long salmon. It's so big, you slide it in the mouth, and you come out the tail. And you land in a foam rubber sea. You climb through a cave. You climb over boulders. It gives kids a sense of the struggle that salmon go through to get back to the city of Seattle. The first playground to be developed in Seattle, when the neighbors came together, some of the kids showed up in wheelchairs. So the neighbors said, we want to make sure every kid can access this playground. They built the first wheelchair-accessible playground in Seattle. We see over and over again the kind of innovation that comes out of the community that's much less likely to come out of the bureaucracy. All kinds of park projects have been done by community volunteers, usually at problem properties, and fixing them up. So this is one of the larger parks. This is totally designed and built by volunteers to commemorate Dr. Martin Luther King. All kinds of environmental projects. This is downtown Seattle, where they're capturing the water off the roofs of the buildings to irrigate our community gardens. This is called the Beckoning Cistern. It's capturing the water off the side, 10-foot-high cistern like the hand of Michelangelo, reaching off, capturing the water off the side of the building. This project never would have come out of our city bureaucracy because it required 7 different departments to approve it. You get much more holistic solutions coming out of the community. All kinds of food security programs. We now have 90 organic community gardens in the city of Seattle, all built by the neighbors. 7,000 urban gardeners. Collectively, they donate 15 tons of organic produce to our food banks every year. And our 20 most recent gardens are in public housing. Immigrants growing food that's indigenous to their culture and having the opportunity to sell the produce to the larger communities, a way to make some income, make cross-cultural connections. All kinds of facilities have been renovated through the Neighborhood Matching Fund. Volunteers coming together to renovate buildings. This is a log cabin that was rotting away in West Seattle, and neighbors fixed it up to become an historical museum. We don't just fund neighborhood groups, we also fund communities of color, because cultural communities often identify with their cultural before they identify with their neighborhood. So this is our Eritrean community that was concerned they were losing the kids to the streets, getting involved in gang activity. They used our matching funds to build a new cultural center, all built by the members of the community. All kinds of youth development programs. This is in our Soto area, south of downtown Seattle, where the backs of the warehouses were covered with graffiti. Mike Perringer, a local factory worker, had a great idea. He says, why don't we see the backs of the warehouses as potential canvases for murals? He called it the Urban Art Corridor. But Mike had an even better idea, and he worked with our court system, and he said, could you offer the kids who get busted for graffiti an alternative sentence where they could come and help us to create the murals? They've now created over 5,000 people, young people have now been involved in creating over 1,500 murals through this program. And we found that as long as the kids are involved in this program, not one of them is reoffended. And all kinds of public art, amazing public art. Public art that would only come out of neighborhoods. This is one of our first projects. I thought it was going to be our last when I told our mayor we're going to use public funds to build a troll under our bridge. But it's been incredibly popular and now brings people from absolutely all over the world, greatly revitalizing the business district, and now we never have any public safety problems under the bridge because there's always legitimate visitors. So here's what I see as the keys to success for our neighborhood matching fund. Ownership by the community. The guidelines were put together for the matching fund. Neighborhood leaders make all the funding decisions. It's not the politicians. It's real community power. And all of the projects are the community's ideas, and they carry them out themselves. Outreach beyond the usual suspects. It's open to any group of neighbors. You don't have to be part of a neighborhood association. Just neighbors who want to come together, who aren't incorporated, non-staffed organizations. The volunteer match, small amounts of money, minimal red tape. Third major paradigm shift is instead of always driving the agenda from the top, and sometimes that's appropriate, if we're really going to partner with communities, we also need to be open to community-driven initiatives, to projects that are the community's idea. So in Seattle, we supported 38 bottom-up neighborhood planning programs, where we actually gave money to the neighborhoods to hire their own planner who was accountable to the community. Made a huge difference because it was the community's idea rather than government's. They made it work. They were able to plan for their own scope of work. Involved hundreds of people in the planning process. First plan was done in my neighborhood of Columbia City. When the plan was done, it wasn't just the planner who was presenting it. There were hundreds of people at the council demanding that plan be implemented and adopted. And every year an accountability session with the mayor to say, we want to know what you did to implement our plan over the past year and how it's in your work program and budget for the next year. A level of accountability we never had with previous plans that tended to just sit on the shelf. So here's what happened. Very low income, multicultural community, highest percentage of kids of any neighborhood in Seattle, but had not had a voice with City Hall. So they had no community center. Their highest priority of their neighborhood plan was to get a community center. Because it involved so many people in the planning process, they had an army. And were able to mobilize them to get the city to put up the money for that new community center in the back, the largest community center in the city of Seattle. But part of the reason I'm showing this picture is because in the foreground is a ball field. My wife, as a volunteer, organized a girls' softball league because there were no sports opportunities for girls. Turns out there were no ball fields. So we built the ball fields ourselves, the parents and the kids. Dozens of ball fields all over the community as a result of the plan. So the plans aren't just about creating a to-do list for government, it's also recognizing there's some things best done by community and some things we best do together. We're able to convince our school to open up at night for community use, where community members are teaching their skills for free to other community members. Our city council had tried for years to get our schools open at night for community use. What a waste of facilities to have schools that are only open 18% of the time during the school day. Weren't able to get that done. Is when they brought in the community, they had real power. Power is not a finite resource the government needs to hold on to so they don't lose it. It's exponential. The more you give it away, the more you get. Had incredible power to make changes in policies. The key recommendation out of our neighborhood plan was we had a business district that had become totally boarded up. We'd lost all the businesses to the mall, to online shopping. As we got more and more businesses boarded up, more and more crime moved into the neighborhood. We lost both of our clothing stores. We lost our pharmacy. We lost our furniture store. We finally lost our supermarket. Then we lost our theater. By 1995, we had hardly any businesses left in Columbia City. We actually had more business going on outside the stores with prostitution and drug dealing and gang activity than we had going on inside. Out of our neighborhood plan, the neighbors said, this is our priority. We're going to take responsibility for reviving our business district. And they came up with the most ingenious solutions. On a block-long blank wall in the dairy plant, they said we're going to create a mural to showcase what we love about our neighborhood, its multicultural heritage. We're going to paint out that graffiti, send such a negative statement about our community, and celebrate what makes our community great. Where that closed-up supermarket was, they said, we're going to organize a farmer's market. And volunteers organized a farmer's market. Now we get 2,500 people out on Wednesday nights for the farmer's market. And when they come, they shop in the local retail area. Somebody said, let's fix up the worst storefront in the business district. Maybe get the other business owners to fix theirs up. Somebody said, that won't do any good unless we get a business inside. Somebody said, how about a bike shop? Because there's no bike shop in southeast Seattle. I know that's hard to believe in the Netherlands. Do you have a neighborhood without a bike shop? But we had no bike shop. Somebody else said, how about a nonprofit bike store? So volunteers renovated this building in Seattle Bike Works. Got people to donate their used bicycles that hadn't worked for years. We teach at-risk youth how to fix those bicycles. Every kid who graduates from the program earns his or her own bicycle. They've now formed a bicycle club. They do regular bike rides around the neighborhood. The older kids do the Seattle to Portland bike ride. They've now fixed so many bicycles that hundreds of kids have earned their own. They donate bicycles to foster kids, to homeless families. They're sending bicycles to people of Africa every year. And this is out of a neighborhood that was seen as a place with nothing but needs. Well, despite all these projects and so many more, there was one block in this historic district we couldn't get any businesses to come into. We kept trying to market it, nobody would come. Finally, somebody said, look, if we can't get real businesses, let's pretend. So we painted all the boarded up doors and windows to make it look like they were businesses. There was a hat shop. There was an ice cream store, a toy store, a bookstore. People got excited. Cars were stopping. People wanted to get out and shop. Within a year, we had to take down every one of the murals because real businesses want to get in on the action. This is what it looked like 1 year later with an Italian deli, with a brew pub, with a co-op art gallery that also came out of the neighborhood plan. You go to Columbia City today, you won't find one empty storefront. They're building new mixed-use development to keep up with demand. And everything that happened here built on the community's ideas through the community plan, using the community's resources with a little bit of support from our neighborhood matching fund. So here's what I see as the value of community-driven planning. That implementation happens, the plans don't just sit on the shelf. The resources are multiplied. The government's resources leverage the community's resources, get a lot more done. Much more appropriate development instead of one-size-fits-all solutions. More holistic and innovative solutions, and a stronger sense of community is built as people come together to create a common vision for their neighborhood. Just like to close by saying what I see as the key steps we need to take to be good partners with our communities. And the first step before we would rush out and go and figure out how we're going to help our communities is to recognize that often inadvertently we're doing great harm to the very communities we're trying to help. So the first step is do no harm. And here's some of the ways I think we inadvertently harm the very communities we're trying to help. First one is that we're often distracting the community from their own priorities. We're always out there with our agenda, with the politicians' agenda, with their priorities, and with our plans, and it leaves very little time for the community to focus on their own priorities. Secondly, forcing the community into the bureaucracy silos. Third, I think we're very conscious about how we spend our time. We want to be good stewards of the people's money. But we often forget, we often take people's time for granted who are volunteering. We think of it as free time. And that time's really valuable to the people who are participating. It's time they could be spending with their family. It's time they could be spending it earning an income. It's time they could be spending having fun, going to parties. So we need to make it worth their while. And too often times we just go through the motions. We're a democracy, so we automatically do consultation. But we haven't always thought through ahead of time, how are we going to use what we hear? And even if we use what we hear, we often don't feed back to people, here's what we did as a result of what we heard. And if people don't see a result between their participation and results, they learn it doesn't pay to be involved. We have turned so many people off to citizen participation. We complain about the usual suspects. We create them. When I was trained as a community organizer, the iron rule of community organizing is never do for people what they can do for themselves. And I think our community development movement's lost its way over time. We're starting to do for people, speak for people. And we've forgotten the role of community development workers is to give the community its own voice, to help build the capacity of community to speak and do for themselves. And increasingly, we're treating third sector organizations as if they are the community. They're much more pliable than the citizens. They work the same hours, they speak the same language, they're being funded by local government, so they tend to be more responsive, but they are not the community. For the most part, they haven't been elected. They're probably less representative than the council is, than the local government. Secondly, we need to remove barriers to community participation. One is centralized decision making. Drive as many decisions as possible, as close to the people as possible. One-size-fits-all programs and regulations where the name of efficiency, fairness, we treat everybody the same and don't respect the unique culture of the people, the unique physical character of the place. Inaccessibility, know-it-all attitude. Again, not apologizing for the expertise and the bureaucracy, but recognizing there's incredible expertise, often of a different kind, in our neighborhoods. And you bring those two kinds of expertise together, you get the best possible outcomes. Obsession with measuring results. I'll talk more about that in a second. And bureaucratic red tape. Biggest problem everywhere I go. Community groups want to do projects that get to local government, they're told all the reasons why they can't. I was just in Palmerston North in New Zealand, and it was so refreshing to see how they were dealing with the red tape. Their local government is issuing get-out-of-jail-free cards to neighborhood activists. And the card says, this card may be handed to a city official if you unwittingly contravene a regulation in your effort to make your neighborhood a better place. And the city planner's phone number and email are on the back side of the card. Isn't that cool? And then finally, we need to work to rebuild the capacity of community. Offer leadership training, assist with outreach tools like translation, work with associations of all types, not just the neighborhood associations, with the faith-based groups, with the sporting groups, with the hobby groups, with the youth groups, with the senior groups. There are hundreds of networks in every neighborhood. And if we really want to get everybody engaged, we need to reach out to all of them. Everybody's organized. They just don't belong to a neighborhood association. To provide forums for networking, to start bringing these associations together, to offer non-meeting options for engagement. Again, meetings are the worst way to get people engaged. Highlight community strengths, share stories of successful communities, and move beyond client services and citizen participation to community empowerment. Last slides. This is the bugaboo I always face. How are we going to measure our results? You know, if we're doing community development work in the right way, it should affect all kinds of indicators, because if you build stronger communities, it makes people safer, it makes people healthier, it makes people more resilient, it creates more sustainability. So what do we measure? And what do we take credit for? I think we spend way too many resources measuring stuff when we could spend those resources actually doing some good. I was raised in Iowa, so I love the old Iowa farm proverb. You don't make the hog fatter by weighing it. And I love Einstein's quote, not everything that can be counted counts. And not everything that counts can be counted. We're often counting the wrong stuff just because it's easy to count. So I love what they've done in Port Phillip, Australia. They said, you know, the only thing that really matters is whether people are happy or not. Think about it. What else is important? So they trained volunteers how to be smile spies. And they walk down the street, they capture people's eyes and see what percentage of people smile back at them. And then they have a formula they work out, and they calculate how many smiles per hour are in each neighborhood. And they post traffic signs to show how many smiles per hour in that neighborhood. And it's the only indicator I've seen that's actually changing conditions, because no neighborhood wants to be seen as unfriendly. So the numbers keep going up. They're up to 10 at Luna Park. This guy's really happy. He's up to 14. So I just want to close by saying I want to thank you for the incredible work you do. I know you guys are incredibly committed to your communities. I want to thank you for the smiles you put on the faces of people in your neighborhoods. Encourage you to do even more. But I don't want to end sounding very Pollyannish. I want to remind you that we really are facing some serious crises. And I've got a friend who says, you shouldn't waste a good crisis. In fact, we can't afford to waste another crisis. Now is our time. Let's make the most of it. Thank you.